Hi there, welcome back to ADSR FM8 tutorials. Make sure you get yourself subscribed to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ADSR tuts. This is part 2 of the Hardstyle feature we've been doing using FM8 and kind of other loops and hits and stuff to just create a Hardstyle loop, focusing primarily on creating the sounds with FM8 and then looking at some other production techniques. So in part 1 we made this 808 kick drum. We also made this kind of low, the bass stab basically. So in this tutorial we're going to look at how we can sort of just give that 808 kick a bit more of a kind of punch and transient, and also layer up this bass sound and start doing some bus processing with the bass sound to kind of thicken it out a bit and just widen the sound so it's got like 3 layers to it. So can take this Ozone 5 mastering off for now, and this is also, I need to mention this, I didn't mention this in part 1 of this series, that this is once October's done and we've done the 4 tutorials using making hardstyle sounds using FM8, this is going to get passed over to the Reactor site. If any of you guys are subscribed to the Reactor site, nireactor.com, and so the FM8 hardstyle sounds we've been making in these tutorials and in the sound bank that we've delivered this month are going to be getting remade in Reactor. So if you wanted to learn some of those techniques and apply some of those same techniques we're using in FM8 inside Native Instruments Reactor, get yourself over to the Reactor site and get yourself subscribed there so you're notified when the videos start getting delivered in November for those sounds. So back to this sound then. So after the first tutorial, basically, if we get rid of these kind of mid and high basses and just put this back into stereo out for now to ignore the bus, we had this bass stab and we had this 808 kick drum sound that we used Nephaton to kind of synthesize, and then FabFilter Saturn to just really heavily distort and compress using the Saturn. So I noticed playing this loop back, the 808 kick drum's got a nice kind of boom to it, which is what we want, but it's got no kind of punch or transient. It's so the master right down, we're not getting like just any top on the kick at all, so I thought we needed to remedy that a little bit. So what I'm going to do is chop a kick drum out of a kind of a loop, really, just to give us that nice kind of top or that knock to the kick drum. So create a new audio channel. I mean, you can use kind of any kind of hit for this, but I had quite a bit of success using a kick drum I chopped out of this loop. So it was this one here. You can hear it's got that kick drum on that loop, had really nice top, I thought. So let's open that up and just kind of chop it here. So I don't want all of that really, I don't really want the tail so much as just the sort of start, the pop really. And we can add little fade on there. And that should do really. And then what we want to do is, looking at this kick drum on the multimeter, most of the energy is around here, so we want to roll off this kind of transient kick. We want to roll it off to about 200 really, so it's not got any low frequency interfering with that kind of boomy 808 kick. And then turn this volume right down as well. Right then, so what we want to do now then is just copy this over. Create a little folder group for that. And now if we listen to these two sounds in isolation, gives it that punch. It's kind of, when you mute it, you really miss it. So and then if we put this bass sound back in as well, you can tell we really need that sort of that punch and that kind of knock to the kick drum. So remedy that using just chopping out a kind of like a nice sort of kick with a nice bit of transient and stuff, and just do a high pass on it, and then layer that with your boomy 808 bass drum. And so now what we want to do with this kind of bass sound here, we want to layer this up, just because when the drop of this track, or a track like this, it's very sparse. You know, it's just that kind of hardstyle sound. It's just a really boomy kick and just a bass stab. So we need that bass stab to really fill the kind of like frequency spectrum. So do this by layering this bass stab up, creating a couple of different instances and just processing them slightly differently. So for starters, it's going to duplicate this channel, copy this MIDI over, and then just kind of take this MIDI and just lift it up one octave. So, and then I can process this slightly differently. I mean, one thing for starters is look at this bass, main bass. A lot of the energy's down here around sort of 60 to 200, so I can do a little EQ sweep on this bass sound, just so the frequencies, the low frequencies, aren't interfering too much. So, and I'm also going to do a little dip on the highs as well, because I'm going to add a third layer that's going to take care of a bit more of the sort of top and the kind of high frequencies. So, and then we can look at this FM8 instance as well that we've copied over here, and just tweak this slightly. What I could do here is introduce a little bit more distortion on this kind of mid channel, use a tube amp to do that. It just kind of sort of just degrades the sound even more, really, makes it really sort of compressed and distorted. Maybe boost some more of the kind of lower mids in the sound as well. And let's move over to this filter section here and just take this cutoff up a little bit as well. Just gives us a bit more of that sort of mid-range bass kind of style. And let's add a little bit, let's sync all these envelopes here and link them together. And I just want to add a little bit of release onto this bass, or this mid-range bass. With them tempo sync, let's just drag this release out to about 3 or 4 over 8. So we're getting that nice tail on the sound. So now if we put this back in with the kind of low bass, maybe pull the level down a little bit. Mute and unmute it, you can hear it sort of, it's filling that bass sound out a little bit. So what we can do is take this one step further, duplicate that channel again, copy this MIDI over, keep the MIDI the same here, so it's G3 basically, and then so this can be mid bass, and then rename this high bass. Then what we can do with this bass channel is this EQ we need to tweak slightly, and just roll a little bit more of the like kind of low frequency off, and then take that high, that kind of high dip that we've done, take that off. And one thing I want to do for starters is make this really wide, so spread this kind of like high bass right out into sort of stereo field. So I'm going to use sample delay to do that, and just delay the right channel quite heavily. And so on its own it sounds quite strange, but when you put it in with the other two basses, it's adding some kind of stereo feel to those basses, but also they're only the high frequency, so we're not kind of muddying up or adding any stereo width to kind of the lows or the mids, so they're kind of staying nice and mono, and this is just kind of spreading the sound out over the stereo field. So, and then we can tweak this FM8 patch again, maybe take that tube amp off on this one, take the volume right down, tweak this filter as well. So we can hear, if we kind of mute and unmute those kind of mid and high basses, we can hear that they're just helping the sound just kind of fill that sound out a bit. So we can duplicate these over. And then start looking at some bus processing for these bass sounds. So just kind of processing them together makes sense really, to just make them kind of sound just like this one kind of like sound really, rather than three separate sounds. Just kind of gel them together a little bit. And I've set up a little bus channel here that I'll explain. So if we get with these three channels set up, just send them to bus 1. And on bus 1, what I have here is just a Fab Filter Saturn that's just distorting the sound. So and I'm using the warm tape setting, got the mix on full, and I'm driving it 68%. So, and one of the other thing I could do here is use this dynamics to just kind of just compress the sound a little bit. So go full, it really brings that tail out, but we'll back it off a bit. And that's just helping to distort the sound a bit further, just kind of gelling those three kind of layers of the synth together. And I've also got some reverb send on here, so we've got a send to bus 2, then I've got this Valhalla vintage verb, which I thought for this kind of sound there's quite a lot of heavy reverb on these sort of stabs, so rather than using a standard reverb, the Valhalla vintage verb is kind of like an effect sort of reverb. It's quite extreme, some quite extreme settings, so really cool for this sort of thing. So just use one of the presets here, Bright Hall, and just tweak it a little bit. And then with this reverb on a bus send, what we can do is add an EQ after the reverb. And we can see there's a little bit of bottom end in our reverb that we don't really want, so we can roll that off. Zoom in a bit here, and then maybe roll off some of the highs of the reverb as well. So it's not too kind of harsh in the top end of that reverb. And so that's kind of our sound set up there. So one last thing I wanted to look at was a new kind of sidechain compression tool that I've just discovered, rather than setting up this kind of Logic compressor what I had initially here and using a kind of kick drum to trigger the compressor. I've discovered this new tool by Cable Guys called Volume Shaper 3, and they actually have the X for Records LFO tool that does a similar thing, but I found this kind of interface is just a lot more intuitive and just very easy to use. And it just kind of ducks volumes, and you just create this envelope here. So over to the right, we've got at the moment it's looping over 1 bar. As you can see, so we want to change this to 1/4. So you know, it's every kick drum basically, every beat, and then reset this setting here, and then at the moment we've got full volume, and then we can just draw in, just double click, just add a couple of these pointers, and we can just draw in a little volume duck. We'll add another one in here. I just find using that just so much more control over your sidechain kind of compression. Really, it's doing the same thing, but rather than using the compressor and attack and release times and thresholds and stuff, we have this kind of really precise sort of tool to just kind of duck our sounds out of the kick drum and stuff, which is just which I think is just great, a really useful tool and I'm going to be using quite a lot, I imagine. So yeah, that's the kind of sounds done. Let's give another listen to the loop. Okay, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Make sure you come and check us out for part 3. We're going to be adding some hi-hats and the snare to this loop, and also that kind of rising pitch sound that you heard there as well, synthesizing that in FM8. So yeah, any questions, please get in touch, and make sure you get yourself over to fm8tutorials.com. Tons more tutorials creating various different sounds of FM8 on there, and yeah, hope to see you again soon. Alright, cheers guys, bye.